Hi, thank you for tuning in. My name is Laura Odell, and I was asked by Jasmine Moore and some people with the City of Lawrence involved with sustainability to do a video about PermaCommons Community Garden and talk a little bit about permaculture. So just wanted to introduce myself and let you know that I'm doing this video with my son, Henry. Hi, he's helping out with all the technical support there, and Henry's also a great helper and participant at PermaCommons Community Garden, and he'll be helping out with that today. So,
I water stuff.
yeah, he's my hydrologist, my irrigation specialist. So.
Hi.
So we're going to have fun showing you the garden today. So part of what I do is I'm a coordinator for PermaCommons Community Garden, which means that I help sort of direct some of the educational components for the garden and teach new members about it and how we take care of some of the perennial food crops that are there. It's really a very special example of a perennial food production system or an urban food forest with understories for medicinal and native plants. So we look forward to showing you that garden here shortly. I'm also a landscape designer for a low maintenance landscape here in Lawrence, Kansas, and I have the great privilege of working with Ryan Dominic and Brenda Skaman, along with a crew of really amazing people for installation, nursery, office work, and maintenance. So I love to help people find out how to create sustainability on their own home sites, whether it's in an urban environment here within the city of Lawrence or if it's broad acre out on many acres of land, and how to make that land more productive and self-sustainable and work in a way that is working with nature and not against nature. So PermaCommons is an amazing example of permaculture design, and it really takes many of the different principles that we use with permaculture. For instance, rainwater catchment. You'll see that we have 1,500 gallons of rainwater catchment on site that's held by 3 500-gallon rainwater catchment tanks that are elevated and amazing. We will also show you what a swale is and how that works with the lay of the land and how we are working to capture rainwater as it moves across the land and make it available for the perennial fruit trees and shrubs and vines and ground cover that is available in this garden. It is not a free-for-all site. The food that is produced on site here is for the members at PermaCommons, but any excess produce that we produce on site goes to Just Food and is donated to community in need. We practice integrated pest management, so we're always wanting to do organic controls. If there is a pest or a disease issue that comes up, we work together, all the members of PermaCommons, to work together collaboratively on what needs to happen with the site, and it can change frequently. Every day, every week at that garden, something new is happening and something new needs to be done, or there's a new learning opportunity. And I have a great opportunity myself as a coordinator to not really be the person that knows everything, but kind of guides the educational experience. And I feel like me and all the members learn together. If something new comes up in the garden, some plant that nobody recognizes, we work together to identify it and determine if it's something that's beneficial for the system that we're creating, or if it's not, and how we're going to control that plant. For instance, bindweed is something that we try to reduce or eliminate using organic controls, but plantain or dandelion or clover, lamb's quarters, those are plants that we find beneficial and that we would allow to exist in the garden as ground cover and permaculture perennial plants in the system. So I'm very grateful for everyone that was involved in the creation and the implementation of PermaCommons, Sustainability Action Network, and Steve Mooring. And most importantly, many other volunteers have been involved with the design, implementation, creation, and maintenance of the garden up until this point, where I became coordinator in 2015. And to all the volunteers, I say thank you very much. You know who you are. And without further ado, Henry and I are going to take you on a wonderful tour of PermaCommons, so please join us.
All right, so here we are. Henry and I are at PermaCommons Community Garden. This is 1304 Pennsylvania Street, and this is the spot that we are responsible for taking care of. So in the wintertime, we shovel the sidewalks to make sure that it stays clear for people that are walking. We love it when people pick up their dog poop, so that's great. Otherwise, what we do is just try to maintain the wildness, sort of act as the stewards of this garden while allowing the perennial species to really take over and thrive. So there's quite a bit of nature here on this quarter-acre lot that we will show you, and we'll walk you through and talk a little bit about all the different species that we have here, some of the fruit trees, shrubs, vines, ground cover, and perennial species that we have here at PermaCommons. So Henry, you want to say hi?
Hi.
Henry, my son, is the camera operator here today, so I'm grateful for his help. So out here in the front, between the sidewalk and the street, this is considered an easement. You can plant certain things on this property with the understanding that if the city has to come in and work on utilities, that is something that could be lost. So you may not want to plant anything that's super special or sacred here with that possibility. But here at PermaCommons, we've planted many different edible species. So over here, on the north corner, between the chestnut tree and the sidewalk, we have some blackberry vines that are coming up here. This is a thornless satin variety, so no thorns on that. And then underneath, we have a ground cover that is a wild primrose, and we also have this columbine that likes to self-seed regularly, and you can tell that it's getting ready to bloom, and it's a beautiful blue flower whenever it blooms. We also have this purple dead nettle that comes up as an understory, which is great. If you have chickens or if you have quail, they love to eat that. And then continuing further this way, towards the street, we have a jujube tree, which is valued and prized in Asian cultures. A beautiful date-like fruit is produced by jujube. And it can be a good understory tree, although I would probably recommend it more for full sun if you were wanting to plant that. And underneath the jujube tree and sort of in this middle area, we have red raspberry. And you can see here that there is a little bit of pruning that can happen at this time of the year. You can really tell what is going to be productive and growing in the season and what's really done. This past year, this cane would have produced fruit, so it no longer serves a purpose. So you can prune this down to the ground and remove it. These red raspberries do have thorns on them, so you want to make sure and use rose gloves or leather gloves whenever you're handling anything like that. Out here, I generally let any wild ground cover take over that really finds this to be a desirable growing area. So we have some chickweed here. That's a great medicinal plant. We'll have lemon balm coming up later. We've got a little bit of lily of the valley that's been planted and is starting to spread. So, you know, definitely being very careful with your plant identification, because that is poisonous, but it's a great shade tolerant ground cover. So it is something that we will mix in every once in a while. Further on down this way, you know, there's columbine again, more chickweed again, more purple dead nettle. Over here in the sunnier area, this is Dame's rocket, a great native that'll come up here just from seed, and I will need to clean up a little bit of that debris to, you know, have it really show off whenever it is time to bloom. And in here we also have some native black raspberries that are amazing, that will fill in this area as well. Over here, we're going to start going in through the garden gate area, and I'll start showing you some more of the perennial species that we have inside the fence. All right, so here on the south side, we have some cornelian cherries. These are not very sweet cherries, but they are prized in certain cultures for being a very unique and special fruit. Whenever we harvested these this last year, I put them in vodka for a special Christmas treat. Over here on this south side, we have a sweet cherry. The variety here is Montmoreni, and beautiful cherry tree, very low maintenance, and good production from there. We have an understory of nettles, some catmint, and some strawberries, columbine, clover, and then just some walking onions that will just kind of take up house in various areas of the garden, and provide like a good insectary benefit to the trees around them as well. So we like to encourage that. Over here on this side, we've got some red raspberries that have come underneath the sidewalk and are now wanting to take their place here in this fence area. So I'm going to be training them up into the fence area and allowing them to continue. Underneath this mulch pile here, we have some fig trees that have been here since the garden was first planted. This is mission figs here, so it's an older cultivar of figs that are hardy in our cold climate. So right now they are underneath mulch to protect them from what has been cold. But today is April 18th, so we're getting to be close to a frost-free time, so it's going to be safe to take the mulch off of them and allow them to stand up vertical and go ahead and produce their leaves. Now here, this is a clove currant or a spice currant, and the blooms smell amazing. It smells a little bit like cinnamon or vanilla to me, so spice. So this clove currant, very nice, low maintenance shrub that you can incorporate into your landscape or into your farm if you're looking for more food production. Over here is another cornelian cherry. The blooms are finished. This is one of the first things to bloom in spring, even before a forsythia, and it's a beautiful yellow blossom that comes on. Gooseberry is another wonderful, beautiful cascading shrub that you can incorporate into your landscape. It does have thorns, so picking the fruit can be a little bit challenging, but there are some specialty picking equipment that you can use for that. Over here, next to the rain barrel, we have a hazelnut shrub, which is also a beautiful, very low maintenance dwarf tree or shrub that you can incorporate a very unique type of leaf here. We have not gotten a crop off of the hazelnut yet. It needs to be planted with another variety for pollination to take place. We also have a mulberry here. This is just a native mulberry that the birds brought in, but it's something that we have decided to keep as it will help to shade the rainwater catchment here. This is the only rainwater catchment that we have on the north side of the property, and you may be able to see how there's sort of an aqueduct coming over from the neighbor's property here into this tank. And during most seasons, we don't have to use city water. We're able to rely primarily on the rainwater catchment that we have here, which is 1,500 gallons on site. So something that you may notice in PermaCommons Community Garden is that we don't have boxes or square or rectangular little areas for people to plant and harvest from. It's all perennial, which means that it all comes back every year, and we all work together on the entire garden for any pruning, weeding, harvesting, or pest or disease management that has to happen. But for the most part, we welcome nature in the garden. If you have wild primrose in your garden, and if you have tomatoes, the tomato hornworm will prefer to go to the wild primrose before they go to your tomatoes. So sometimes it's helpful to have certain native weeds in your garden in order to help protect maybe one of your more preferred food crops. So that's something that you would want to look out for and protect in your garden. Now here in this space, we have several different plants happening. I was given some peony plants, so there's several planted around the edge of this bed. They're wonderful, usually bloom around Mother's Day, and it is a wonderful cut flower plant and sort of an heirloom plant that a lot of people really love in this part of the country and everywhere really, prized in Asian countries as well. We also have blueberry shrubs that are planted throughout, and I am also just starting to plant some sand plums that will take over whenever the blueberries start to come closer to the end of their useful life. We have some culinary herbs that are growing here as an understory. So we have some oregano and some thyme coming up, along with some chives that are in this area that look great whenever they bloom purple. And then we have a couple of dwarf apple trees. These is the Liberty variety of dwarf apple, and they just look beautiful and they smell beautiful right now as they are starting to blossom. We've got great pollinator support for all the ground cover that we have here. You can see some more of the lower growing purple dead nettle here. There's little bees all over the ground cover. You can kind of hear them buzzing around, and then being here, they help to support the primary fruit tree species that's planted. Now in this area, we're going to come across another sweet cherry. All of our trees tend to have these necklaces to help us identify them. This is another Montmoreni tree, and we try to prune it with an open shape towards the middle, so you can kind of see how the middle is left open, and there's no branches, coming towards the center, so that it gets good air circulation and it helps keep the tree healthy. Over here we have a couple of more cornelian cherry trees, also very early bloomers. And across the way, next to that rainwater catchment, we have another type of dwarf tree. This is a gala dwarf apple tree, and there in front of the gala, you can see we have these sort of raised beds that undulate. We have pathway bed, so that we can access them in the middle, not have to step on the soil and compact it. But we've also planted some new varieties of figs in this area. This is Hardy Chicago. This is something that we offer through our nursery at Low Maintenance Landscape, and you can grow figs in our area. These are cold hardy, but I do mulch them heavily. So now that we're getting to the frost-free time, the mulch will come off and then they'll be able to stand more vertical. Now this is sort of an interesting thing that's a little bit different. This is something that a lot of people would consider to be a weed, but it's something that I don't discourage in the garden. This is curly dock. It is a medicinal plant. The roots can be used for medicine. It's good for helping to prevent liver congestion. And the leaves can be cut down periodically and used to mulch in place and add nutrients to the soil. So we have a couple of plants like that all around the garden. So like this comfrey here, this fuzzy comfrey, great medicinal plant, and also a wonderful living mulch to have planted around the garden. And occasionally we will chop and drop this plant, cut it down, and then put it around the base of another fruit tree or shrub in order to build nutrients and build healthy soil. Another interesting thing about this garden is, and then there's reasons for that really. This is the beginning of spring. This is a great time to remove any debris from your garden that you may not have already done. I tend to wait until the plants start to grow more before I remove any debris. There's lots of reasons for that. There are many native pollinators that will use the hollow stems of certain plants in order to have their seed, their eggs, and their larvae grow and develop and then hatch. So whenever we do come through here and then we remove this debris, it goes into a pile back here in the back of the garden on the other side of the fence. So I will leave it for about another month or so that any other pollinators that need to have their larvae grow and hatch have that opportunity before it goes to the city compost site and gets broken down. So I really want to invite and welcome native pollinators and native species into the garden. The more diversity that you have, the stronger the garden is. So that's one of the maintenance techniques that we practice here. That's a little bit different from a lot of other gardens. It tends to be a little bit more wild because of practices like that. But we have very little pest and disease pressure, and I think it's because of things like that. We have praying mantis here. So this is a praying mantis cocoon, and this is the ancestor of a praying mantis that came from my mentor Steve Mooring's farm out at Vajra Farm years and years ago. So I love seeing these around. One way that you'll know praying mantis hatch is that there will be a hole in the bottom of these cocoons where the practically 100 or so praying mantises will come out of the cocoon, and I've been lucky to see that a couple of times. So another great reason to leave debris in your garden, you know, for just a little bit longer and just be okay with nature taking its course. This is a peach tree. I do recommend planting, peaches in our area if that's something that you're interested in. Definitely look for something that is a later blooming variety, because we do tend to have late frosts sometimes, and that will completely eliminate your harvest for the year if your peach tree decides to bloom earlier. So later blooming varieties are good. Here, this is an Asian pear, one of my favorite types of pear trees here in this part of the country. Very low maintenance, very low pest pressure, so I highly recommend them. And you may notice around the garden as well that we have these trellises, these archways that are placed in various locations. We are going to be putting some squash planted around the trellises. We're also going to have some passion flower and some Dutchman's pipevine for additional pollinator support. Here we're coming to another interesting feature of the garden. We like to try to use rainwater on this garden as much as possible for the valuable resource that it is. Now, if you look back to where we started at the beginning of the garden, up there in that corner by where the cornelian cherry is, that represents the highest level of elevation on this property. And if you come this way down here towards where the rain gardens start, this is the lowest elevation on this property. Starting up in that corner, then that first pathway that goes from the rain catchment barrel over there to that first cherry tree, there's a pathway that's dug down. So rainwater will actually go into that pathway and it will slow down, stop, and sink into those beds going down elevation, creating an underground water lens that helps the cherry trees all around that area, the blueberries, and then those Liberty apples and everything else in that area. And the perennial species are able to put their roots down further and access that water that's being held in the soil. There is another swale as you move this way across the garden as well. So you'll see the path that goes over there between the figs, and they're in front of St. Francis, and they're in front of the water spigot, and then around this way. This is another swale, which is basically just a pathway that is dug to be on contour. So it's a level pathway that helps any rainwater to slow down, stop, and sink into the ground, making it available for the other perennial systems. Now there is a flood prevention that's built into the system as well. As some of you may remember, this last summer we got a lot of rain in August, and it was definitely flood conditions. So you'll see here we have these drain tiles. Okay, so if it floods enough that the swale is not able to absorb the rainwater in this pathway, and if the water gets up above this drain, then it's going to go in here, and then it exits over here at the rain garden site. Right here is where there's a pipe for like a rainwater drainage that moves down here. So there's one drain tile up there by the first set of figs. There's a second drain tile here by the spigot, and then underground there is a drain pipe that exits here. And you can see there's been some stones and some bricks laid in this area so that it prevents erosion. And continuing all the way down, we have our first rain garden sort of catchment pond here. Okay, this is the first depression. And then it raises up a little bit more, kind of goes up elevation, and then it goes into a secondary rainwater pond. So let's go take a look at that. This is the larger of the two rainwater catchment areas, and just a lot of wild ground cover is taking over in this area. Tends to be more water-loving things. We have some swamp milkweed in this area and some Amsonia that's planted in here, some water-loving species that are helpful for our pollinators. We have some Monarda here, or some bee balm, that's also planted. But this is not designed to be a pond. It's not designed to hold water. It's designed to hold it temporarily, but then allow the water to sink into the soil within about 2 or 3 days. So it is not a mosquito haven in any way, shape, or form. Over on this side of the garden here, I just want to point out we've got another Asian pear, and then we start getting into some pawpaw territory. Whenever they have the leaves on them, they're really quite striking as well. Kind of a tropical looking plant. But here, let's show the bloom for a pawpaw right there. Beautiful purple, and the blossoms hang down. So that's pretty different in comparison to some of our other fruit trees. Pawpaws are great. Once they are larger, they can handle full sun. But whenever they're very small, they tend to prefer to be like an understory plant for other trees, especially walnut, I believe, is a good overstory tree for them. But once they get to be bigger, they can handle full sun, and they usually will produce more fruit if they are in full sun conditions. We've got several comfrey plants that are planted as an understory. We've got some more daylilies here, trying to help prevent any invasive weed pressure, and some more curly dock. We've got aronia. This is a low-growing fruit-producing shrub here. It's getting ready to bloom. We've got some echinacea, some purple coneflower here. You can see where the seed heads were. And at this time of year, if they haven't already dropped their seeds, you can go ahead and rub them into the soil and maybe get some more purple coneflower plants if you're lucky. We encourage clover in this area, and we also like to encourage plantain. So here, this is a plantain that did very well this past season. And plantain is a wonderful medicinal plant, good for spider bites. So definitely encourage that in the garden. Here we also have a sand plum that is growing up and starting to look very nice. Sand plum does have some thorns to it, some larger thorns, so you want to be careful. Here is probably one of our tallest sweet cherry trees, and this past summer, this one produced the most, and it was the most amazing tree to harvest from. We're always looking for ways to add more diversity, increase pollination, increase harvest. With permaculture, we want to try to put in as little energy as possible and invite nature to help us with these things. So in this way, I'm looking to nature to help suppress weeds, to build soil, and to welcome more pollinators here so that we have good fruit set and good harvest. The elderberry species And I'm just kind of pruning off a little bit of the dead wood from the previous season. But here's the new growth. Now, elderberries are amazing. They're one of my favorite plants for medicinal use, and I think every house should have an elderberry shrub in it. Very low maintenance. The blossoms are something that you can use in medicine, or you can also eat them. You would never want to have an elderberry raw. It is toxic raw, but you would want to cook them and use them in food, and that would be considered safe. Elderflower has medicinal uses, as well as elderberry that some people may be aware of for the medicinal uses for that. So trying to teach, when is a good time to harvest and how we harvest and how we use this plan is something that I teach here as a coordinator for PermaCommons Community Garden. Okay, can you think of anything else we need to talk about?
Nope.
Nope.
It's gonna take forever to edit.
Oh, brother. Okay, well then I think that we're probably good for now, right? Okay, all right, let's go ahead and close it up.